R.E.T.I.N.A.
Resident Evil has taught us over the last 25 years never to walk past a window, never turn your back on a wardrobe, and to never trust a corpse. The series has been surprising us and terrifying us for so long now, with jump scares and atmospheric build-up. With locations from the Spencer Mansion to House Beneviento making us terrified to take steps down the sinister hallways, as the music and ambient noise would heighten the tension. Many of us will have had nightmares over these moments that were burned into our memories and gave us a chill whenever we recalled them. And over 25 years we've had so many moments to pick from that would fill us with the sense of dread that this world of survival horror has come to be known for. So let's look at just 10 scary moments from the Resident Evil series that have left their mark on us. Number 10. The Drained Demos Nest. The original Resident Evil 3 will always be a special entry for me, with it being the first Resident Evil I completed, but it always left a lasting mark on me. Many memories include the Nemesis stalking me in the streets, the Gravedigger attempting to devour me, the Hunters attempting to decapitate me, and who can forget those horrific flea-like creatures, the Drained Demos. They were my first real exposure to quick enemies besides the Cerberus and Nemesis, thinking they would be easy to fight, but they would get up and flail madly at me as they tried to drain the spinal fluid from my body. Come the remake, they would give me a new reason to be terrified of them, with the newly redesigned creatures orally impregnating Jill and forcing larvae down her throat, and forcing her to use a green herb to vomit up the little It only got worse as I would run through the darkness frantically trying to restore the 4 power switches while avoiding another oral nightmare. The tension and fright of jumping at every shadow as you try to avoid the Drained Demos still fills me with a dread even after 10 plus playthroughs. Number 9. The Spencer Mansion. This is a bit of an unusual one. Most people are terrified of jump scares or certain creatures when it comes to Resident Evil, but for me it was the environment and the accompanying music of the original that terrified me. It was the main reason I couldn't finish the game because of my anxiety overload it would cause as I walked the hallways of the mansion. It only got worse as I discovered new areas like the guardhouse, the aqua ring, and the underground lab. I could be blindfolded playing this game, and the sound and musical score will always terrify me way more than any jump scare or BOW in that game. Thankfully my copy of the director's cut did not have the dodgy trumpet music of the basement. That alone would have probably knocked this entry off the list. Number 8. Introducing the Licker. Now, I played these games in an awkward order at first, starting with number 1 and not finishing it, then number 3 and completing it, and then number 2, and then all in the correct order from then on. So I was completely unaware of what horrors awaited me in the Raccoon City police station. Having seen the environment in Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, I didn't really think too much of the place. Oh, how wrong I was. I came to the waiting area where I first glimpsed something red scuttling past the window. I disregarded it as a zombie dog at first and just thought nothing of it. Then I came to the next corridor, seeing the broken windows and the corpse of a missing head, reading the description saying it had been twisted off. Then I saw the puddle of blood and the dripping coming from the ceiling. Pressing onwards, that FMV kicked in. I saw the skinless, blind, spider-like creature and I could not comprehend what I was about to fight. This would be my first memorable encounter with the Licker. As soon as it hit the floor, I just laid into it with my handgun, but then it shot out its tongue at me, and having not healed earlier, I died on the spot. I would be constantly on edge ever since that encounter with the Licker. Like many who have played the original Resident Evil 2, you'll just know how unfair these creatures could be if you weren't at decent health and prepared properly. Especially since they were introduced very early in the game, when you're not expecting such a steep climb in difficulty. When you did beat your first one, you felt like you could take on anything, and then Mr. X would remind you that you're never going to be ready for what lies ahead. Number 7. LYCAN Window. Village would give us one of the best hybrids of action and horror in the series so far. Going through the woods in the dark, being made defenceless against Lady Dimitrescu when you lose your right hand, and don't get me started on the horrors that await you in House Beneviento. But one of the scariest moments that still gets me no matter what is when you're attempting to unlock a cabinet in the village. The code number you need is written on the environment, but the only way to see the code in the correct order is to look out through the window. But as you focus on the numbers and take them in, a LYCAN jumps at the window right in your face. I am not ashamed to say I screamed and nearly threw the controller in my face when this happened the first time. There is a saying, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. In my case it should be, fool me 8 times, I'm a f***ing idiot. I kept replaying that moment on each playthrough thinking it couldn't get worse, but what I found was the timing of the scare seemed to be different each go. Likely this was down to my own mind playing tricks on me after 8 encounters. Now I just memorise the code from previous playthroughs and don't look through the window anymore. Or I could do what one other Resi suggested and leave a landmine outside the window as a booby trap. But then your jump scare turns into pro wrestler Rey Mysterio's original entrance. Number 6. The Keeper's Diary. Through every Resident Evil game, there are dozens upon dozens of documents to be found that contain so much lore and world building information. Some just giving clues, while others expanding on character background and locations. Some of the best documents were diaries of characters or unseen NPCs. A few notable ones are Dario from Resident Evil 3 and Chief Irons from Resident Evil 2. But one of the most famous documents belonged to the Keeper at the Spencer estate, the Keeper's Diary. Before you even get the chance to read the diary, the Keeper himself will launch himself out of a wardrobe attempting to eat you. Once you'd dealt with him, you could return to the diary. It documented the everyday goings-on of the staff at the mansion, and detailed the outbreak and the aftermath of the T-virus. Not only does this cover what happens to the Keeper, but it also hints at the existence of the Tyrant and how the Cerberus got into the surrounding R.E.T.I.N.A mountains. While it is a great piece of literature to read, it also gets progressively more horrific and scary as you realise the Keeper is slowly succumbing to the T-virus, having his body slowly decay and his mind deteriorating to the point where he eats dog food and murders others before only being able to write the words, itchy, tasty. This may not be scary in the traditional sense, but the language and pacing of this document made it one of the best moments in Resident Evil. Number 5. Beginning our demo. After the poor to average fan reception of Resident Evil 6, many of us clamoured to return to the classic survival horror roots of the original trilogy. Capcom took the saga back to the drawing board, and what we got was Resident Evil 7. Not only did they take the time to look back on what made Resident Evil so terrifying, they also went and created a whole new game engine that would change the look and feel of Resident Evil. They went further by changing the third-person over-the-shoulder camera to a first-person view. This would bring Resident Evil into the world of VR. The first taste of Resident Evil 7 would be in the form of the Beginning Hour demo. It starts with you inside a dimly lit room covered in grime and dirt everywhere. The more you delved into the house, the more horrific it got, with posed mannequins, nude dolls, and a toilet full of blood. The Blair Witch style videotapes of found footage in the demo only added to the tension, along with the flashes of a little girl appearing at random and Jack Baker appearing and disappearing. This only upped the fear factor more as you worked your way through the house. It came to a head when you encountered a moulded and Jack Baker with nothing more than a pistol with limited ammo. Scrabbling around in the dimly lit house while trying to avoid Jack made this one of the scariest moments in Resident Evil, which would only be dialed up to 11 when the main game was released. Number 4. The Regenerators. After Resident Evil 0 ended up being the swan song of the traditional gameplay of fixed camera angles, besides the remake and Outbreak files, it was time for Resident Evil 4 to change things up, and it did in an extremely big way, with less of a focus on survival horror and more action and quick time events. But this doesn't mean that Resident Evil 4 wasn't without its scariest moments, with the Granados providing the core of the enemy encounters. But then that changed when you hear that rasping breath of the Regenerators. These things would keep taking your shots and barely flinch, constantly regenerating their damaged bodies and limbs thanks to the multiple Las Plagas parasites inside their bodies. The methodical, slow march of these creatures is reminiscent of the Mr. X Tyrant, but once close enough they would extend their arms and pull you close and open their huge mouths and feast on you. To make matters worse, the Iron Maiden was introduced, which was like the Regenerator, but covered in hundreds of razor-sharp spikes. They would grab you and pull you onto their spike-covered bodies. Even without attacking you, these creatures are so uncomfortable to watch, and when they move, their spasming motions only make them even harder to look at and all the more disturbing. I can only imagine how we're going to need therapy when these nightmare-fueled creatures return in the inevitable Resident Evil 4 remake. Number 3. The Cerberus Hallway. Yes, you know which one I'm talking about. The infamous hallway where you are walking minding your own business, then suddenly the window closest to you shatters, and as you run from the pursuing Cerberus, another bursts through the window ahead. Depending on the path taken, this may be the first time encountering the Cerberus hounds. To make matters worse, if you're playing the director's cut, the hallway on the opposite side of the mansion, which normally contains 3 zombies, has changed it to 2 Cerberus which also leap through the windows after you. Even the remake subverts expectations by changing the infamous corridor encounter to delay it a bit. No matter how many times I play this game and know this moment is coming, you can't help but feel anxious and the adrenaline kick in once that glass shatters and the music attacks your senses. This will always be one of the most defining moments of Resident Evil and solidified it as one of the greatest horror games of all time. Number 2, the GEMBRYO birthing. For most people they would see this moment as just a rip-off of the infamous chestburster scene from Alien, but that still doesn't change the fact this was one of the most horrific scenes in Resident Evil 2. Depending on the scenarios played, this can happen to either reporter Ben Bertolucci or Chief Brian Irons. William Birkin, the G creature, would find his victims and impregnate them with G embryos through their mouth in the hopes of reproducing new offspring, but the intended victim is not compatible due to a lack of similar DNA, and when the embryo is rejected, the host victim ends up being violently killed. They begin to feel an unbearable burning sensation in their chest, and then suddenly they split into 2 as the G larvae breaks out of its victim and slithers away. While we did see this moment again in the remake with Irons, it just didn't have the same visceral reaction and tension of the original. It's still memorable, but what happens to Elliot felt much more horrific than Irons' fate. This scene will always be one of the most horrific forms of body horror I have ever seen in Resident Evil. The moment the G larvae erupts from Ben or Irons, you're so aghast and mortified that you think nothing can top it. The slow build-up and the visceral death of the character is burned into your mind. Even for a PS1 era game, this moment had more of an effect on me than most current day horror title gore. But there's one other moment that has now nested a special place in the deepest, darkest reaches of my mind. Number 1. The Beneviento baby. This was not something I expected to see in Village. I knew they were going to push things further than before, but giving us flashbacks of the still living fetus in a sink from the Silent Hill PT demo was not what I expected. This is its bigger and more terrifying cousin, while trying to escape the twisted mind games of Donna Beneviento and her doll Angie. You wander the basement of the house solving a series of twisted puzzles involving Mia and baby Rose, with Mia turned into a mannequin which you can manipulate to solve clues. But as you near the end of the puzzles, the power has cut out, and Mia's mannequin is now missing. You walk down the dark hallways with streaks of blood lining the corridors, and what looks like umbilical cord. You hear Mia's voice repeating over and over,
"It'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll be fine."
And that is when you encounter the horrific mutated fetus form of your daughter Rose. As long as I live, I will not forget my first reaction. I froze, horrified at the disgusting sight laughing its way towards me saying "Dada." I remember saying "F*** that" as I turned and ran back trying to avoid the fluid-covered monstrosity as it dragged its hideous body towards me. The power of the RE engine has really been used to its full potential here, to even make me feel nauseous as the baby would stalk me down the hallways. It was made all the more terrifying by the fact you're defenceless during this whole section in the house, with no way to fight back. The second time you encounter this creature, you find yourself hiding under a bed petrified you will be discovered, or in a nearby locker. You attempt to make a run for it, hoping you can outrun the creature. Then the worst moment of all comes as you summon the elevator and can hear it slowly lurching its way to you, and you blindly panic as you get in and press the button to go up. With the baby still coming at you, and the lights going out, not sure if you've pressed the button quick enough. Then the lights would come back on briefly, and you would see the monster stopped by the bars and screaming as you leave behind this mind-bending hellhole. Over 25 years of playing Resident Evil since the beginning, and I haven't been so terrified of a single encounter like this one. Even just thinking back on that very first time encountering that abomination just fills me with a sense of dread I didn't think possible. Every time I attempted to replay the main story of Village, I would stop once I knew House Beneviento was coming and start again. It took me a total of 4 replays before I had the confidence to return to that nightmare. Big praise has to go to whatever warped mind came up with this piece of genius. A truly brilliant moment in Village. A perfect storm of using story elements, visuals, body horror, and sound design to a truly nightmare-inducing effect. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Did you agree with my picks? Please leave a comment below with your most horrific moments from Resident Evil. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and ring the bell to stay notified of new Resident Evil content. Thank you, Rezzers, and I'll see you again soon.